Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Healing Home. I'm your host, Michelle, and today I am joined by my fiancé, Mario Garza of Symbolic Studies. How you doing, babe?
Pretty good. Here I am. Here we are.
Yes, I'm very excited for this one, as always, to have you here in The Healing Home and that we get to be in the same room.
I know. It's nice, right?
And chat it up casually.
For sure.
About
I know.
what's going on.
I look forward to these because I feel like I present a different angle when I'm around you because I'm so comfortable and we talk about this stuff all the time that I feel like these chats are informative for other people and then I have a good time and it's just good vibes and all that stuff.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm really excited about what we're going to explore today, which is polar and solar symbolism. But we are basically piggybacking off your presentation that you just gave on Friday.
Yes, correct.
So I'm really pumped on this because I know already you've had other insights that have come through and we're going to get into it and we'll pull in whatever comes through when we're talking about it. It'll be fun.
Yeah, definitely. So I figured, every time I do a presentation, I always have, new insights and people send me things and I reconsider things and then I kind of kick myself for not saying certain things and all of that. Not too hard, right?
No, you never get too regretful about it.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm like, this is a good opportunity though to kind of like talk about any of the loose ends, maybe that I didn't get around to. So
yeah,
here we are.
And what's coming to me right now, just in the moment, is like maybe we make it a tradition that after you do a presentation, we can have a follow-up on the Healing Home.
I think it makes sense.
And kind of like so that just, to flesh out all the things that you were just talking about and anything that you wanted to get off your chest with it. So
definitely.
Yeah. We can totally,
we'll
plan
riff.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll make it happen.
Right. But before we get started, just want to say to everybody, hello and welcome. And for all things Healing Home, you can go to michelleshealinghome.com and you can find my blog there, the Herbal and Natural Cat Care ebook, which is still available. If you want to learn more about me, read my blog, schedule consultation, you can do all of that there on michelleshealinghome.com. And thank you to all the patrons out there. We really, really appreciate all your support. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just because we haven't done this setup in a little while, if we do want to get confirmation from the chat that we sound good,
oh sure,
and all of that, that would be cool.
Yeah.
So let me check real fast before we get into it. So, alrighty, we got a few people here.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for hanging out. Nice to see you.
Some familiar faces, but if we can get word that we're sounding good and all of that, that'd be fantastic.
All right, sounds stellar,
loud and clear.
Bueno,
nice.
Awesome,
Sweet. All right, cool.
Great confirmation.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.
Sometimes I get paranoid about that.
Well, we've had it when we were doing last Thursday. That was our lesson. Was we weren't really checking in with the sound, and then one time we went back to listen to an episode, and it was like, damn, our mics are hot.
Yeah,
so,
right. Totally.
Now it's time to just check in when we go live. So, yes. All right. So as always, I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to maybe new listeners who aren't familiar with your work. So if you can just tell them briefly where they can find you and what's going on and anything else you want to start off with.
Yeah, totally. As always, symbolicstudies.com is where people can find my stuff. I offer tarot readings. I do study sessions, sometimes called consultations with people. Those have been really, really fun. I really appreciate all of my, students who have, hit me up to have those sessions. I get a lot out of them personally, too, because it puts you in a different spot when you have to teach somebody something.
Yeah.
When you're tasked to like teach somebody something that they don't, then it's clear that they don't know as much about the topic as you do, versus when it's just always kind of swimming around in your mind and all of that. It's been really, really cool to kind of like get down to the nuts and bolts and the fundamentals of certain cards and myths and things like that. So people have hit me up to do all sorts of different things, study the tarot with them, different astrological signs, different myths. People have wanted me to, review their artwork and things like that. So definitely leaning into all of that because I feel like I'm, kind of qualified to do some of those things for people.
Yeah.
So, but basically my project, right, has been going on for I kind of lose track now, but it's been a while.
Yeah, probably
like
five.
Yeah, I was going to say like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And it's kind of debatable on when I started putting out content, kind of. But I usually follow each astrological sign during the sign itself and produce content. These days, I am more so republishing, reposting content that I made over the years. And I feel like, kind of segueing into today's conversation, I feel like my heart right now, to be honest, is more with the presentations.
Yeah.
It's more about the actual information itself for me right now. So the last one I did, as you mentioned, was on Friday about esoteric solar symbolism. I called it the rising sun. And the solar topic is something that I've really been interested in for a number of years. And I'm not surprised that it's kind of coming around at this point for me to really get it out there, what I really think about some of this stuff. You know, because I feel like a lot of people's interpretation of solar symbolism is one-dimensional. And so what I feel like I'm doing is I'm actually giving a more sort of holistic, kind of complete interpretation of solar symbolism. And it's funny that I say that it's one-dimensional because part of what I'm bringing to the equation is this polar influence, right? Which people who follow my work will know probably a bit about what that's about. And the pole is three-dimensional. And so it literally is like the z-axis, right? So if you're looking at, you know, the x and y axis on a piece of paper, the pole itself would be the z-axis. It's what you know, pops out into 3D space. And so the pole and polar symbolism, really, to me, it seems like if we're looking at the sun and we're kind of looking at symbolism in general, that there's a hierarchy to symbolism. So there are traditions that go further back. There are traditions that are considered to be more primordial, and it has to do with a polar awareness, or with polar wisdom, I've kind of been calling it too lately.
Yeah, which I like.
But yeah, having to do with the North, having to do with this idea of a center, the supreme center. And it's kind of interesting to wrap your head around because it affects everything. It's like one of these things where once you have an understanding of it, it influences how you interpret other symbols. And so now that I feel like I've kind of initiated myself with some of this material because I've been reading so much about it over the years, that there's kind of no going back. So now when I read a myth or I look at a symbol or I try and decode something, the polar sort of influence or the polar perspective, to me, it kind of just like jumps out at me now. And I'm like, how did I not see this sooner? You know? So one thing people have said is that, and there's an author that I'll be referring to multiple times because he has been such a game changer for me in a way, in terms of just quality content about this, quality material about this, is Rene Guénon. And he is under the impression that, you know, polar symbolism is never really lost, but it's just hidden, you know, and you kind of have to have eyes to see it, basically. But once it's pointed out, you'll see it all over the place.
It's like the ultimate occulted subject.
It seems to me like it's
kind of what it feels like as you've been bringing more of this to the table, as I'm getting my own understanding of it. I'm like, damn, this is probably one of the most occulted things in this realm or something like that. At least that's how I feel about it.
I mean, related to that, just saying that when I would say probably 3-4 years ago, I really was looking into H.P. Lovecraft as an example. I was looking into H.P. Lovecraft. I was reading the Necronomicon books. I was reading authors who were decoding Lovecraft. And I was surprised that, and the reason why I really chose to go down that rabbit hole was because I was reading stuff that was implying that Lovecraft was encoding polar symbolism. He was encoding the northern or primordial tradition within his works. And then there are other authors like Kenneth Grant, as an example, that I got into more so like last year, read a couple of his books. And the reason why I decided to go down his rabbit hole too is because I knew that he had an understanding of some of this stuff. And so as I dug through the occult world, and as I dug through some of this black magical Lovecraftian material, what came out of that was the polar tradition. It was Northern symbolism. And so to me, that is one of my biggest takeaways with sort of my magical studies, is realizing that, oh, this material is actually discussed in the occult world. And I think that when you're talking about some of the most hidden types of magic, or insights or understandings about this reality too, it's polar in nature. And so there are authors out there that have discussed this. You have to seek it out, and it goes by different names. And the way I've kind of put it too, I've talked to a couple of people about this, is I'm kind of looking at the different flavors or the different sort of aspects or angles of Northern symbolism, polar symbolism, and the polar tradition and everything else. So there is absolutely a polar current, that kind of goes through the black magical side of things. And so absolutely. So to me, I think there's a lot to be said, I guess, about the world of occultism and then this polar sort of idea and this northern sort of thread.
Yeah.
That's a whole sort of thing. And maybe I'll do a presentation about all of that at some point. But yeah, so to me, you're totally right. It's like there is an occult aspect to all of this. I would say there's even, kind of a left-hand path aspect to all of this.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I would say too that the polar current is very feminine in nature. There's a masculine aspect for sure, but there's a feminine aspect as well that's pretty apparent and pretty obvious when you dive into it.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to me. So I think that this earlier sort of tradition, it was more earth centered. It aligns very nicely with geocentrism, and it aligns with the feminine. It aligns with the north, so the northern portion of Earth, the northern sky. And so those are the things that have kind of been swept under the rug. Those are kind of the things that really aren't as heavily discussed or promoted or, whatever you want to say. And so even in my presentation, I was talking about how the polar symbolism definitely relates to the night, and solar symbolism relates to the day.
Right.
And so this is more, the way I tend to look at it is a lot of people's understanding of solar symbolism is very, very, to me, it's surface level and it's very exoteric. It's not the esoteric side of things.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, and I'm really glad you brought up left-hand path because, that in and of itself too is usually swept into the category of negative or bad or like black magic or something like that, where it's not necessarily that in my opinion is not left-hand path. Just because something is left-hand path doesn't mean it's inherently bad or negative or ugly or something like that. If anything, it's there that like the polar tradition has its own occult history to it as well, and I think has been inverted because we're in more of a heliocentric universe system right now. That it's like down with the dark, up with the light, and make sure the light is always on top and the dark is always on bottom, and that kind of mentality, and that like the left-hand path is something that should be feared. Right. But that in my opinion is also, and I'm sure you would agree with this, is there's folly in that, because then it keeps you from understanding stuff like what we're about to talk about, or the polar tradition, or the divine feminine, or the primordial tradition, with a more holistic, balanced perspective. So if you're going into something and you're fearing it, you're going to have a different response to it. So that's what I think of when the left-hand path comes out, because I know it's something we talk about at length a lot. And I appreciate it. And I find that there's more freedom in the left-hand path than there is sometimes, because on the right-hand path, you're more restricted with what you can say, how you can say it. Oh, you can't say that because that's just a little too negative or whatever, but it might just be realistic,
Right.
So
I'll put it this way. I'll say that I think that there is a bit of nuance here, in that I think the right-hand path versus the left-hand path um, I'll say that I think that there is a positive and a negative right hand path, and there's a positive and a negative left hand path
Yes.
as well.
Agreed.
And so there's actually this sort of like dual nature. There's a polarity even within those sides, right?
Right.
And so I would say that just the same thing with light and dark, if we're just going to talk about light, which is very applicable here. So
Yes.
that's a major part of this conversation actually is light. And, you know, we're not going to do it justice in some of the things that I'm going to bring up because it's a very, very deep topic. There's so much to say about light and what it means symbolically and everything else. But there are a few things I definitely want to mention that I think are very interesting that I didn't really get around to on Friday. But I think that same thing with light. So there is a positive aspect to light, and there's a negative aspect to light. You know, there's a positive aspect to the darkness. There's a negative aspect to the darkness. And so to me, with the left-hand path, I think you can be personally. I think you can be a balanced, righteous person that is walking the left-hand path.
Yeah.
You know, and I tend to see the left-hand path as being more of a sovereign, individualistic sort of thing, having to do with your autonomy, having to do with your power, your divinity. I'll say probably the biggest thing for me personally is personal responsibility.
Right.
That's what I tend to think of with the left-hand path.
Right.
I see the right-hand path as being more collective, more communitarian. I see it as being more, exoteric. So not looking deeper. You know, the other thing that relates to all of this would be the root system, as well as I see that the at least this is just my opinion, that the polar tradition, geocentrism, sort of this left-hand path sort of perspective actually has more to do with the roots of self, of spirit, of this place. It has to do with the sort of origins of this place. So I very much see the roots of a tree as being kind of aligned with this because it's more of the hidden side of things.
Right.
So that's what we're dealing with here. So the sun, as an example, is so visible, right? It is the luminary that is the most radiant. And everybody has to acknowledge it. There's no way you can't acknowledge the sun. You have to appreciate that fact. And I do appreciate that fact. And I think that it's a beautiful thing. And so that's the other thing maybe that I kind of just perhaps want to clear the air on is that I'm not anti-solar.
Right.
You know, I'm not anti-solar. I think that'd be very foolish of me to be anti-solar. Good luck with that one.
Yeah, right.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
What I'm kind of, I think my angle is kind of that a lot of people have already waxed poetic about the power of the sun and the glory of the sun and everything else. And when they're talking about this, I think sometimes what I mentioned in my presentation is that, one, they're not always talking about the actual physical sun.
Right.
That the sun is actually a metaphor. The sun is a metaphor for something else. And in this way, it's a metaphor because it's what Ganon might refer to it as like a secondary principle. It's like a secondary center. It's not the original center, but it's a substitute for the original center. And so many things are like this, by the way. So people's holy land, right? The two, I always use Mecca and Jerusalem as an example. But these are actually secondary centers. So even Atlantis, is like a secondary center. That's one thing that I'm really interested in right now. There are a lot of temples and places of worship, but these aren't the original center, right? But they're basically they're templates modeled off of an original center.
They're mimicking.
They're mimicking, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of like simulations in a way.
Right.
And to me, the North really is that original model, which basically, I mean, so many different groups have considered their paradise or their Eden. Whether the people, the followers of these traditions are conscious about it or not, what's being encoded is that these people's holy land, their original sacred site, where you would go for a pilgrimage, right?
Mm-hmm.
which is the location that transcends realms, because we're talking about the world axis here. We're talking about the bridge between realms, that a lot of people's sacred centers are just mirroring that original center, essentially. And so in a way, everybody's sacred center, holy land, temple, is a mimic of this original thing.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
whether they're conscious of it or not, that is kind of what they're encoding with everything. And there's so many examples of this. And one great book that I read that gets into this a lot is At the Center of the World by John Michel. And he talks about a lot of these centers. He doesn't call them secondary sites or secondary principles or whatever, but Ganon does, and I agree with him, because that's totally what's going on. You know, so but the sun is so magnificent, right, that you have to acknowledge it. You have to work with its rhythms, and you have to work with its patterns and everything else. And because it's so in your face, and because of its light-giving properties and everything, I just think it's really interesting that a lot of people never consider the idea or the fact that the sun has a story, that the sun,
right,
you know, symbolically in a lot of different myths has a mother, right? So I think of like the demiurge. So the demiurge is, you know, a lion-headed serpent, and he was the first masculine entity, the first masculine sort of creation. Sophia gave birth to the demiurge, and so she now had a masculine counterpart, basically. And he was so arrogant that he thought that he was the end-all, be-all supreme deity of the universe, essentially, right? He wasn't aware that he came from something. He wasn't aware that there was a God above God, and that God was Mother. So I think that this is speaking to this polar solar shift that we're kind of talking about, you know, of the polar being related to this original essence, which I think is in large part very, very feminine. That was not like really mentioned at all during my presentation, but that's definitely a thread that you can kind of pull at. And that the demiurge is kind of just so egotistical, you know, that it doesn't really it's not aware, and it doesn't want to understand that fact that it actually came from something, right? So the sun, a lot of solar symbolism essentially has a lot to do with this northern polar concept and idea, and a lot of people obviously they're not really hip to that. And so I feel like my sort of project on Friday was trying just to at least, you know, scratch the surface with some of this stuff, and how, you know, there are people, very knowledgeable symbologists and sages and mystics and stuff, that had this kind of understanding and awareness that literally there is a relationship between solar symbolism and this primordial polar sort of aspect of things.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things I appreciate about what you've always brought to the table with this research, but you also talked about in your presentation, is that there was a tradition before heliocentrism. There was something that was looked at as a sacred center before the sun kind of was given that role, you know, and that is one of the things that I really like about this, because that's where then you get to that esoteric level. It's the next level deeper,
right,
past what you're going to hear about when you hear about solar symbolism or heliocentrism or whatever you want to call it. And so I kind of want you to speak on that a little bit, even though I know you talked about it on Friday, but just to kind of like bring it back to that, and that being an important part of what you're trying to get people to understand as well.
It really it has to do with the center, you know, and it has to do with what people consider to be the center of, in my opinion, the universe. But the interesting thing is that because we live in a toroidal system, in my opinion, the center of the universe and the center of Earth are the same center. It's no different. So this is one of the flips that has kind of happened, one of the inversions that's happened over time, by my estimation, right? And so heliocentrism, geocentrism, centrism, having to do with the center.
Right.
So when you're in school and you're taught that we live in a solar system and that this is a heliocentric system, what you're saying is that obviously the sun is at the center of everything, right? Now, on one level, that's actually true if you're looking at it metaphorically, because once again, there's a lot of material out there that suggests that was previously, unknown to me until, the last handful of months or whatever, but that the sun isn't always a reference to the sun that rises in the east. It's not the sun that you see with your eyes, but that the sun has been used as a metaphor, as a mirror for the original center, basically. And so we're talking about shifting centers, basically. So in a way, personally, I think that this might have to do with what some people might refer to as a pole shift. When we first started getting into kind of truther conspiratorial type stuff, pole shift narrative information was kind of still out there a little bit. I think it's had its heyday.
Yeah.
It probably goes through cycles. It'll probably come back, and then people are going to be freaking out about a pole shift or something at some
I'm sure
point.
someone is somewhere.
Yeah, someone is somewhere. Yeah, exactly. And
Don't underestimate the power of the fear.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, actually. So I think that this might be what's being referred to when people refer to a pole shift, right? That the center, the pole, because the pole is basically an interface for the center. So if you just imagine a pole, this pole is symbolic of the world mountain, the central mountain. It's symbolic of the world tree. It's symbolic of the middle point and a cross. It's symbolic of the dot that's within the circled dot, the circumpunct.
Right.
Right. So even if you look at the circumpunct, which is the symbol for the sun in today's world, if you're looking at it from a 2D perspective, but imagine it from a 3D perspective, that pole, that dot is going to be a pole, basically. It's going to be poles and holes, which is what I used to talk about all the time. Right.
Yeah.
And so the pole is a substitute symbol for the center because it is one of the simplest sort of symbols that indicates a bridge between the above and the below. That's really what it symbolizes. And this bridge is comparable to a stairway to heaven, right? So it connects the above and the below. It connects heaven and earth together, right? And so every tower, this is the same symbolism. Every obelisk, same symbolism. The pole is just, the simplest, I think, in a way, the simplest sort of symbol that you can kind of draw even or imagine or whatever that kind of gets the job done. And so the pole is symbolic of this center as well. And so heliocentrism, that means that everything is revolving around the sun. Geocentrism, right, is everything's revolving around Earth. And so to me, the polar tradition, the primordial tradition, the northern tradition, it's a geocentric perspective. And they believe that the center of Earth, which is the north, is the supreme center that connects all of the realms together, right? So I'm starting to see it a little differently. I'm not saying that you need to worship the North Star. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you need to worship the North. I'm not saying that you should go to the North. I'm not saying that the North Star is the center of everything. I think people maybe think I think that. But what I think is that the North Pole and the Pole Star, they are along the line of the bridge that connects the realms together.
Yes.
That's what the ancients believed. That's what a lot of ancient cosmologies are based on this. And actually, I think a lot of people's cosmologies were based on this in a more recent history than what probably a lot of people imagine. There's still a lot of cities, as an example, their names translate to something along the lines of like a center or the middle, something along these lines. We have this concept of like a city center, right? And so there might be a town square at the city center. There might be a spire or a tower at the city center. What used to be a really common thing, this is my understanding, is that, and this is based on, Ganon's work and John Michel's work and other people's work as well. But my understanding is that it was very common for the ruler of a town or a village or a city or an empire, a region, to divide their space into 4 quarters. And so they would literally divide it with a north-south road, an east-west road, and the middle would be the middle of their empire, or would be the middle of town. And I've said this before, but that middle would be a sacred center, so this would be where people would come and congregate. This is where people would basically this was where festivals maybe would happen at. This is where laws would be created at. And this fits in line with this idea of a lord or a king, and where lord and king symbolism actually comes from, which I have to give props to Ganon once again, because I just finished this book right here, and we'll see if actually, there we go, The King of the World. And sometimes it's actually called the Lord of the World, and he gets into king and lord symbolism. And really what it comes down to is that the Lord occupies that center space. The Lord is in the middle of those 4 quarters that you divided your region into. I'm pretty sure to be drawn and quartered, it's a reference to this sort of idea.
Interesting.
Because you would be paraded around, and humiliated
around the town center.
Around the town center. So you literally drawn and quartered, I'm pretty sure is related to this idea, is that you're going to be on full display to all 4 quarters of the town.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
And so the king or lord, he says basically, and I'm like, this is pretty powerful stuff. It's very interesting that the king occupies that center space. The lord occupies that center space. And that this center space is always indicative, once again, of the actual original center, which would be more of a northern sort of understanding of things. And so Lord King symbolism goes back to a polar king concept. It goes back to a northern king concept, right? Mm-hmm. And so they occupy the middle space, and so they consider themselves to be transcendental, right? So in a way, you're kind of like a bridge or mediator between the above and the below, right? But we all are. We're all mediators between the above and the below, right? This is, to me, what a lot of the magician card is really all about. Is that's why he's holding his wand, which is a world axis symbol. He's holding his wand upward, and then he has one hand that's pointed downward. He's connecting the above and the below. He's a bridge between the above and the below, right? So this concept is sometimes referred to, my understanding, as the Great Triad. That the Great Triad is Earth, Heaven, and then man. But like you,
right.
Specifically you, and so so we all occupy a center. So from here, from my vantage point, I have a north, south, east, and west. But symbolically, I am in the middle point of like a crossroads, right? Or of a cross. So I am in the middle of those 4 points. So I also, once again, I am at the sacred center of everything, So we all occupy that sort of central position or that central spot. This is really interesting because Christ symbolism as well, right? The King of Kings, the Lord. It's debatable when you're referring to Lord what you're referring to, but Christ certainly has a lot of this symbolism completely attached to him. And one of the things I mentioned in my presentation was that I think Christ was more polar than solar, and so he got solarized over time. So many things got solarized over time that it'll make your head spin a little bit.
Right.
And so that was one of the things with my research, was just realizing like, holy shit, I'm like, why is everything attributed to the sun? This doesn't quite make sense. But some authors that I really gravitated towards, they were giving more of a holistic, complete picture of things, that even sun symbolism isn't necessarily just solar. There's this other thing kind of going on. So Jesus Christ has a relationship to the cross. Once again, we're talking about the cross and how it divides up a town.
Yep.
My understanding, too, is that this sort of way to divide a region, it's mirroring the heavens. So you look at the universe card or the world card, and there's cross symbolism baked into it. So even literally the Hebrew letter that attaches to the world card is tau, which means cross. And then what do you see in the corners of the card? You're going to see the 4 fixed signs. You're going to see the fixed cross. So the woman in the world card is occupying that central space in the middle of this cross. And so basically the idea is that the heavens were divided that way. And so I believe a lot of people thought that if the heavens are divided in a large cross, which is a really simple way to divide things, a space, right? A circle, then that's good enough for me, as above, so below. Right. So if we divide the heavens as a cross and there's different crosses in the sky, then that's how we're going to divide our town and our village, right? The other interesting thing about this that makes perfect sense to me is when you imagine a cross, right? X marks the spot. The cross is basically an X, right? In my opinion, that central point is where the world tree would be. It's where the central mountain would be, Mount Meru or whatever you want to say. And to me, this is really fascinating because the Emperor card is the 4th card of the major arcana. And at least in the Rider-Waite version and in other versions, it's fascinating that he looks like he's a central mountain. So here we're dealing with the number 4, and then we're also dealing with mountain symbolism, and we're dealing with this king lord sort of concept reigning from the middle point. That's the other aspect of all of this, is that your kingship or your kingdom is ruled from one point, basically. So your perspective, your authority, your power, whatever it is, your law, I guess you could put it that way too. There's a lot to be said about law symbolism and how it relates to the world axis as well. But it would make sense that there would be a center to the region, and then your authority, your laws emanate out from there, right?
Right.
So it kind of, in a way, it just reminds me of like the hub of a wheel, which is part of all of this stuff too. And even the wheel itself, the spokes of a wheel have been compared to the rays of a sun.
Yeah, I love this point.
Yeah, so that's something that you'll definitely come across, that the spokes of a wheel relate to the rays of the sun, and the sun-like qualities are supposedly there. And what Ganon says, which I think is really interesting too, is that the ray itself, though, or the individual spoke of a wheel, is symbolic of the world axis. So even the rays of the sun are considered to be world axis symbols. So the ray of a sun is a world axis symbol, and it just makes sense because you're talking about that line. You're talking about that vertical axis. You're talking about the thing that connects one thing to the other.
Right.
With the wheel, it would be you're connecting the hub of the wheel, right? The center of the wheel to obviously the exterior, of the wheel itself.
Right.
So, to me, when I think about that, when I think of the wheel, I look at it and I'm like, to me, what better describes the wheel? Its function and its design, how it's practically used, right? To me, polar symbolism, which is axial symbolism, describes the wheel better than solar symbolism does.
Yeah.
The solar aspect of a wheel is a secondary sort of thing. That's more of a modern sort of thing, in my opinion. But the pole itself and all of the polar wisdom, it makes more sense to look at a wheel and have that click and have that make sense before associating it with the sun.
Yeah, interesting. Because, when I think of a wheel too, I almost think of like we are wheels. And so when you're looking even at the, the zodiac casting of a chart, of an astrological chart, that is known as a zodiacal wheel, or the wheel of the zodiac.
Right.
And then if we are wheels ourselves, I think about, saying something to the effect of heal the wheel. Like it's all about healing this.
I like that.
This
nice.
vessel, and so I think that the sun too is very, necessary for healing as well. So we know all of the benefits that come from this. We know that life cannot even really almost go on without the sun because so many things are dependent on it. But I think too that the underlying esoteric like thing behind that is that none of this though exists without the pole. And perhaps the sun doesn't even exist without the pole. If you want to go like a step further of like, you know, the kind of like the birth of creation, the creation of this whole thing, you know, perhaps is just what you've been saying is the center.
One metaphor that I think is very appropriate here is the idea that the sun has been viewed multiple times over. There's a lot of, I guess, traditions that kind of say this, but the sun being a fruit on the world tree. Not the world tree itself, though.
Okay.
So it's a fruit on the world tree. So that means that fruit came from something.
The tree.
It came from the tree. Exactly.
Right.
So you have to acknowledge the tree before you acknowledge the fruit. Obviously, fruit's great, you know, all that kind of stuff, but it's a fruit on the world tree. And even the zodiac signs have been compared to the same thing, that they are fruits on a world tree. What I'm acknowledging is the tree.
Right.
That's
exactly.
That's what I'm trying to get to. That is my interest right now, is that tree, is the thing that predates the fruit itself, right? And even I almost included it in the presentation. There's a really famous quote, and it's at a temple in Egypt, and it's the temple is called Sais, and I believe it's an Isis temple, basically. And basically, Isis says something along the lines of, I'm probably going to butcher it, but I, Isis, am all am that has ever been and all that will be. No one has unveiled me. I cannot be unveiled. But the fruit I have brought forth is the sun.
Interesting.
And so basically saying that, exactly, they're talking about the origins of the sun.
Wow.
You know, the fruit I have brought forth is the sun. And so that's talking about the origins of the sun as well. That the sun is supremely important, but it isn't the end of the line. And so what we're really talking about here too, and I have it written down in my notes to discuss, is this idea of a spiritual hierarchy. So we're talking about a spiritual hierarchy. And one of the things that it took me a long time to realize is that there are newer gods, there's old gods, there's ancient gods, and there's primordial gods. That not all gods are created equal. And I think that the symbolism is really baked into these myths too. So as an example, I brought up Lovecraft earlier. You know, he really likes to talk about a lot of these really old ancient primordial gods. So much so, you know, that what he's created is that these gods are very grotesque and mysterious, beyond belief. You know, they're horrors beyond imagination. So that's what Lovecraft literature has been referred to as cosmic horror, basically. And so you're thinking about horrors beyond imagination, that they're so primordial that the human mind can't even like wrap its head around what they even look like and what they're all about or anything like that. And so he likes to discuss in his works these old gods, right? And so that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the difference between newer gods and older gods. I'm of the opinion now that astrology and the signs that most people refer to with the zodiac, you know, that these are actually as old as they are compared to us, you know, and our lifespan and everything else. We're dealing with not the most primordial of gods. We're actually dealing with a newer tier of gods. And it's actually said the same thing about the planets, that the planets themselves are perhaps a mid-level sort of god, that they're not the oldest gods and they're not the newest gods, but they're somewhere in between. And so to me, the oldest deities have some association with the North. They have some association with this polar sort of concept and idea. That's what I found. And one of the things I brought up in my presentation was that there's reason to believe that the signs of the zodiac originate from the North as well, because everything, if we're talking about the real center of everything, that means that everything emanates from that center and then also returns to that center, just like a torus field, right? So they're all going to have aspects of that center, the same way a huge, gigantic, monstrous world tree, monstrous tree, these ancient trees that some people talk about, came from a single seed, right? It's the same idea that everything came from one, one center. And so therefore everything is everything about that tree, whether you're talking about the fruits or nuts or leaves or whatever, all of that information is contained within that center, basically. So this other guy that I mentioned on Friday, his name is John Jenkins. I can't remember his middle name. But John Jenkins Jr. or something along these lines. John Major Jenkins. Thank you.
Go. Major. Ooh.
Major, right? Yeah, totally. So John Major Jenkins, he blew my mind in his book, and he's not even a geocentrist or anything, but he basically says that the Chinese zodiac comes from the north, that it was a circumpolar zodiac. It was right around the North Star. There was 8 constellations, 1 per trigram. There's 64 hexagrams in the I Ching. He said that this system was being developed right around when the I Ching was being developed as well. He says 5,000 years ago.
Okay.
You know me with dates and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't really know. But according to his research,
A long time ago,
he says that there were 8 circumpolar northern constellations that basically made up their zodiac. That was their astrological wheel. As things got solarized over time, at a certain point, they shifted those 8 constellations to the path of the sun, the ecliptic, and then they added 4 more constellations. I brought this up on Crow too. Mm-hmm. And so that's how they got the 12-sign zodiac. And so he says that the Chinese zodiac is northern in origin. And Ganon basically says the same thing about the Western zodiac, that there's basically it's implied in so many ways that the zodiac has a northern correspondence. So what I'm coming at now, once again, if this is the true center, if there is a true center, a supreme center, that has either been hidden or lost or whatever, shifted, towards the sun. Mm-hmm. There's a conversation to be had too about this shift actually being at the galactic center as well. Which is, in between Scorpio, Sag, and Ophiuchus. That's a conversation to have at some point, maybe. But as this shift has occurred, people lost this original center, and so they don't know where everything is coming from and returning to, right? And so people have no awareness that anything comes from there. But it seems to me like the mythology of the planets, the mythology of the zodiac, potentially all constellations, potentially all myths, all deities, their importance or true significance on a occult level, on a really, really deep-seated fundamental level, has to do with the relationship with the North and has to do with the relationship with the center. But that is, obviously it's been lost to the sands of time, or whatever you want to say.
Right.
But that's my hunch now. I'm like, so where does this end?
Yeah, I mean, I think it ends when you die, but then it starts again. And I think that the answer might come at death in the way that I think we're going back to the sacred center upon death. And so it may be that time where we are able to see what's really going on or something. Yeah. Because I think that the heliocentric stuff has been put in place in a way to keep us from finding our own true north,
that's it.
Our own pole, our own center.
Yeah.
And we talk about this quite a bit, but like when, you can sit around, and I've done this before too, of like, how are these people not understanding this? Why do they do this? Why do they do that? How could that happen? It's like, because people don't know their sacred center. It's a society that has been driven into this heliocentric system of belief that kind of strips you of your own power in your own way, and it's like a subliminal thing. They don't come out and tell you that that's what's happening.
Right.
But I mean, when you really start to study this stuff and then fold in all the things you're talking about, it's like, well, man, no wonder why there's a bunch of people who are making bad choices and don't understand why, or they're doing things that are harming themselves and others. It's because they don't really know who they are.
Maybe, if you don't mind, because I think it's a beautiful metaphor for all of this. And you just talked to her today, Ingrid.
Yeah.
That you took a class with Ingrid, and she has a sort of a ritual, I guess, that involves a staff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Which is a pole.
Yes.
Right. And that I think that she understands it on a different level, and we've talked to her, and you're going to be talking to her next month.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that that's kind of a great thing to kind of relay with people not being centered and not being grounded and not having a pole, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, totally. And so with Ingrid Kincaid is her name, and I've done rune classes with her. And one of her requirements for one of the courses I took was to bring a staff along with you to the class. And at first I thought, that's kind of random, but I have a walking stick. I've got my staff. I'll bring it along. And so the first class, she said that, okay, so when we start our classes, every time we start the class, I want all of you individually to stand up with your staff, hold it firmly with two hands, smack it down into the ground, and say your name, and also ask the question of basically state your name and who you are and what your intention is here in this class. And I thought it was a beautiful practice. And every time we went home after each class, the homework that she gave us always included, when you sat down with the runes for that session you were studying, was to begin your session by doing that, but also asking the question, like going outside, asking the question, like, which way is the wind blowing? These sorts of things. There's other questions involved. It's not like a big long questionnaire or anything, but what the moral of it is that it's remembering, it's tapping into who you are, like remembering that you are here, you're solid, you can be solid by just simply having a practice like that, of having something, a sacred center, that pole there, and you actually basically mirroring the pole and then proclaiming, like, I am Michelle Lundquist. I am here because this is my intention, and just puts you into a really positive place in your mind, and it focuses you almost instantly, and you can be very clear with what your intention is right then and there. And it accelerated my runic studies in a big way. And her whole philosophy on the North, I really appreciate because of these things that she's learned along the way and then incorporates into her teachings. It's really powerful.
Yeah, to me, it's when you hold a staff, you're holding like your symbolic spine, kind of.
Yeah.
You're holding your center. You are embodying an axial position. You are the axis. So you are the hub of the wheel, right? And then I know it's part of her thing as well, and others, but the runes being laid out in like a wheel, right? Like a circle.
Yeah.
Right. So the wheel functions because of that center. It sounds so basic. That's the thing that trips me out a little bit about this, is it sounds so basic to acknowledge the center of a wheel, but people are completely preoccupied with just the exterior of the wheel, just like you mentioned with astrology charts and stuff, natal charts and whatever.
Right.
There's so much information about angles and degrees and signs and asteroids and all of these other technical sorts of things that people are lost, in my opinion. And I think there's fantastic astrologers out there, and I think that there's people doing good work. But a lot of these people aren't even, one, looking at the stars themselves.
Right.
I totally get it. But I think you should pay attention, like, with your own eyes, and your own heart and everything else, and actually visibly look at them for yourself instead of always relying on apps and, everything else. But I see that people are in the heliocentric solarized world. We're so preoccupied with the edges of the wheel itself, right, that we don't even pay attention to the center.
Right.
We don't even acknowledge the center. Right. And so having that staff and doing that is you acknowledging your center, and that is you proclaiming that you are the hub of a wheel.
Yep.
And we all are hubs of a wheel. And I'll say, too, the other interesting thing, because I brought up the spine thing, is that our chakras are wheels. Right. And so that's what chakra goes back to a wheel. And so the idea is that this energy, right, when you're talking about like Kundalini energy, it shoots up your spine. And so it's like going up the world axis, basically through these wheels. And the wheel, the middle part of the wheel, the hub of the wheel, is once again the transcendental point. The center of anything is the transcendental point, basically.
Right.
So whether you're looking at a square or a cross or a wheel or a octagon or whatever, it's that center point that is of primary importance, because the whole object, the whole shape itself, cannot exist without that center. That center is it. So even just going back to like really basic stuff, but it's like you start with a dot. That dot symbolically is the center. That dot represents everything that I'm kind of talking about. So I see a dot now, which is the most ancient, simplest glyph you can possibly have. You cannot get simpler than a dot, right? It embodies all these things.
Right.
It's the sacred center. It's the seed. It's the egg. It's the pole. It's Mount Meru. It's at the north. It's all of these things, in my opinion, right? And then you have a second dot. Now you can create a line. That line looks like a pole, no matter what orientation it is. Too, it looks like a pole. That one straight vertical line. I'm thinking of the number 1. As well. That's a world axis symbol. The number 1 is a world axis symbol. That's why it looks the way it looks. And then you add a third dot. Now you have the triangle. So now you have a shape, right? But that shape, its design really hinges on that center point. The square, it all hinges on that center point. So this is just like basic kind of mathematical, geometrical stuff that you can't escape. You can't get around that. And then you add more dots, and then what does a triangle look like with a fourth dot, right? If you create a shape out of it, it would be the square, and then you add another dot, pentagon, another dot, hexagon, on down the line.
Right.
But with each additional dot and each additional side and each additional line, it looks closer and closer to a wheel. The more sides you give a shape, the more dots you give a shape, it looks more and more like a circle.
Right. And
that circle also hinges on that center point, right? So again, the circumpunct, the circle dot, the symbol for the sun, so anyway, when you told me that she was doing that, I thought that was a really cool sort of thing for her to do, and it makes tons of sense. It's very, very powerful.
It really is, and it really it also then helps you to acknowledge the sacred center of someone else. Yes. And that was what was so cool about the class too. Was it was a way for us to introduce ourselves, each time, and each time you came to the class, you were a little different because it was the next week or it was whatever, Mm-hmm. And anyway, I feel like it was just such a beautiful thing that I keep that memory and that practice kind of close to my heart, because it really allows you to acknowledge your own sacred center, but then that of someone else, because that's also very important to remember, is that everybody has a sacred center, whether we acknowledge it or not. We all have this, and we all have the ability to tap into it, but it's, and these are the reasons why we're talking about this, because how important it is for people to kind of understand this, or at least, consider this as a possibility.
Right.
Consider that what you may have been told about how the sun is everything, the sun is all, that maybe there's something else going on there that, is trying to take you away from more of a deeper understanding of yourself and like what really is going on here.
Right. Again, spiritual hierarchy. Mm-hmm. That's what I see. So the sun is underneath the hierarchy of the pole, in my opinion. That's how it breaks down. So this is why in Freemasonry, which I've talked about so many times now, it's so obvious when you know what's going on, but there's a lot of Freemasonic tracing boards. You're going to see 2 pillars, 2 or 3 pillars. You see 2 pillars, one has a sun on it, the other one has a moon on it. Now, either there's a third pillar in the middle, or in the Kabbalistic tree of life, there is a visible third pillar, right? Mm-hmm. One pillar is solar, the other pillar is lunar. So then what about the middle pillar? What's going on with the middle pillar? The middle pillar goes above and below the other 2 side pillars, right? So what's the middle pillar all about? It's a polar dynamic.
Right.
That's what you're talking about. You're talking about lunar, solar, polar right there in the middle. So same thing with, I broke this down in the Axis of Libra presentation, my last Libra stuff. Same thing. When you look at the scales, I have a tarot card. It's brilliant. There's other illustrations like this, but I'm thinking of one card in particular where the scales are weighing the sun and the moon. Cool. Awesome. I love that, right?
Right.
The projective sun, most people consider it that way. I know there's other ways of looking at it, but generally the projective masculine sun, the feminine receptive moon, awesome. They're being weighed against each other. Well, wait a second. What about the actual function of the scale itself? What about the vertical axis that actually holds the pans to be weighed? That's the middle pillar.
Right.
That's the middle way. That's the world axis, essentially. So the hierarchy in literally the scale itself, it functions because of that middle pillar, because of that world axis right there. And funny enough, it's really amazing, but the scales themselves, Ursa Major and Minor have been called jade scales, and that the world axis was considered to be that middle beam of a scale system, of a celestial scale system.
Right.
So literally there's a relationship with the world axis and with Libra, and Libra's the middle sign. So you'll find, actually, this is really interesting, a lot of letters that correspond with them, a lot of symbols or constellations or letters, like I just said, that correspond with the middle have an axial component to it, that it actually corresponds with the world axis. So Libra, being the middle sign, being the transition from summer to fall, actually has a ton of world axis stuff baked into it. And this isn't my conclusion either. This is me researching stuff.
Right.
So some of this stuff, obviously, I'm putting together pieces to the puzzle on my own accord. I come up with my own correspondences that I think make sense. But that in particular, that is something that's been stated before, multiple times, which I think is very interesting. So Libra, I think in its simplest light, literally might as well just be a pole,
Right.
And so now, though, we have the scales, though. So even the Justice card relates to Libra.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have Lady Justice, or a justice figure in the middle, being the middle way. They're usually right in between two pillars. One pillar lunar, one pillar solar. So what's to be said about that middle pillar? It's polar, in nature, And then obviously Justice usually has a sword. They're holding the sword up. That sword itself, that is one of the classic substitute symbols for the scales. Makes sense? The sword divides and cuts. So it'll take the one and split it into two. That's what you're talking about with the scales as well. You're talking about one energy split into two. So that's what I would say too, symbolically as well, is I would say that, whether you're talking about the sun and the moon, or you're talking about masculine and feminine, these aspects, this sort of this polarity on the pole, it comes from the one. It comes from the one thing. So this is kind of what I've been getting into lately with numerology a bit, and kind of explaining this idea to some people, is that there's only one. There is not two ones. There can only be one. That's the function, and that's the principle. That is the supreme principle. There's no other one out there. So when you refer to the one, you are referring to the one, right? And the one has often been referred to as God, right? And so the supreme deity, if you want to call it that, or the supreme center. So the number 2 is just two aspects of the one. It's not two ones brought together. You can't do that. Metaphysically, spiritually, you can't do that. It is the ones, the one being divisible by two, and now you're talking about the two aspects of the one. Positive, negative, masculine, feminine, light, dark, whatever you want to say, right? So the number 2 is literally the two aspects of the one, the two halves of the one, the polarity of the one, the above and the below of the one. The number 3 is the same thing. The number 3 is the three aspects of the one. It's the triune nature of the one. And then it just goes on down the line from there. So when you're dealing with the number 4, you're dealing with the fourness of the one. You're dealing with the one divided into 4 parts. You're not dealing with 4 separate ones that are being brought together.
Right.
So this is more of a, this is more of the metaphysical principle, in my opinion, behind numbers and numerology, because it all descends from that one, basically.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I heard you talked about this on Spiders on Saturday.
Yeah, right.
And when I heard you say that, I was just like, oh my God, that's awesome. Like I love that. I love thinking about it that way. Because it just makes so much sense to me.
And that's why to me, it makes sense too when I think about like these sort of like systems that involve these different numbers. So I'm just going to go back to astrology real quick. There's 12 signs, right? So you're dealing with the 12ness of the one, that all of these different signs in a way can be brought together to express the one. That's what you're really looking at.
Right.
Which, does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's what it's doing.
And that's exactly what it's doing.
Yeah.
So any system is like that. So I brought up I Ching earlier, 64 hexagrams. These 64 hexagrams, there's 64 aspects of the one, of the changeless center, of the immutable center. That's the other thing that we're talking about here, is the fact that this center, this sacred center, is the still point in the middle, basically. And we live in a world that basically it's so far from that, that there is no sort of stillness anywhere.
Right.
You have to seek it out.
You do.
It's still something that can be sought after and obtained, but you have to go out of your way for it, because everything seeks your attention, everything seeks your energy. You kind of say too that this is like the golden age of distraction, right? That everything's vying for your attention. And so that still point really is completely under emphasized and under kind of appreciated and understood and everything. But it goes back to all of these things that I'm kind of referring to and talking about.
Right.
Right. So anyway, so I think that to me, when I think about the numbers like that, it makes so much sense. And again, the one, it's a world axis symbol. It's no different than the ray of a sun, or it's no different than a pole or anything like that. And even with the runes too, they say that the original rune was Isa, ice,
right,
which looks like the number one. It's just a straight vertical line, and all of the other runes are composed of Isa, basically.
Yes. And as I was studying the runes the other night and reading, I had this kind of epiphany about that. And I started looking at each rune and then the phonetics of each rune and seeing how they're connected to each other in certain ways. And then literally just taking one of the lines off and another line off, and then combining them makes another rune. And then it makes another rune. And so it goes along with this, that it's dependent upon that one line, that one pole, in order for these to be created. And so anyway, it was cool. It was a very cool epiphany that I had.
This is really going back to, again, the fundamental aspect of everything. This is the deal. You cannot divide the dot any further. You cannot divide the one any further. You can have decimals, and there's something to be said about that, but is that more of a human modern sort of thing, or is that like an actual thing? Same thing with the zero. There's debate out there if zero should even be a number. Even our whole numbering system, I'm kind of open to it being a sort of the way we perceive it to be kind of a construct. Same thing with time itself too. I mean, that's in my notes to talk about briefly, but when you look at a clock with 12 numbers on it, 12 is a solar number. That's why there's 12 signs of the zodiac. I mentioned 12 disciples. The number 12 is absolutely related to solar symbolism, and so you have a clock with the number 12 on it, 1 through 12. That's a very solar sort of idea. And then you have the clock going, the hands going clockwise. That's a solar rotation, basically. This is really interesting because this gets into the left-hand path, right-hand path thing. So imagine you're walking that wheel. Imagine you're on that wheel of a clock. Imagine there's a big clock on the floor, and you're going around the wheel, going clockwise. That means that the center is on your right-hand side.
Right.
So this is more of a right-hand exoteric sort of thing.
Whoa.
Versus if you're going counterclockwise, that means that the center is on your left-hand side, which means that this is more of a left-hand polar sort of thing.
Interesting. Whoa. That's really good.
So literally just the clock itself, it's a solar symbol. The way it works is a solar symbol. So for me personally, I brought this up the other night. I'm like, wouldn't it be interesting to develop a clock that goes backwards.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, and so
See what happens.
you can start. I'll check in. I'll supervise and see how that's coming along.
I like the idea of this. Yes.
And then it would be kind of like, well, what number should be the number, And so how many, should there be any numbers on it? I don't know. But the other thing I mentioned on Friday was that in my interpretation, from what I gather, that the clockwise rotation where the center is on your right is more expansive, and the counterclockwise rotation where the center is on your left is more contractive. So the polar left-hand sided rotation brings you closer to the center. And the solar clockwise rotation brings you further away from the center.
Right.
And that's one of my big beefs, which you kind of alluded to already, I think, with the solar paradigm, is that it takes you away from self.
Yeah.
So therefore, like you said too, it takes you away from acknowledging the center in other people.
Yeah.
And so that's my big issue, I think, with it, is that the heliocentric paradigm always encourages externalized everything.
Right.
I usually use the word validation, external validation. You are more, it's more of a community oriented sort of thing. It's more about other people. What do other people have going on? It's less so about your inner journey, in my opinion. It's less so about, what's happening within. And people have heard this many times over, and I'll just say it again, but know thyself and you'll know the universe. I see that the heliocentric solarized age brings you away from self, therefore not allowing you to tap into your true divinity. And I see that, my understanding, and it makes so much sense symbolically, that in the geocentric polar paradigm, that was encouraged. That's what it was all about. It was all about the center.
Right.
And Ganon has said this too, that during the Dark Ages, it's the center that is lost, or it's the center that is hidden. That's why it's considered a dark age.
Damn. Yeah.
And so that's where the real, true, original light is. It's more of a northern polar light. It's not necessarily a solar light, but I understand why the sun itself has been used as a secondary principle, as a substitute for the original light. I think that that's basically the main thing, is that it would make sense that the most glorious, radiant luminary in the sky would be given all of these attributes when the original center is gone. And that's what happens. So now people literally in today's world, will treat celebrities like gods, like literally gods, and so they look at this person like, oh my God, they're so famous, they're so beautiful, they've got so much money, they're so talented, this and that. This is a complete distortion from how things used to be. It's like, why are you giving this person so much credit? They don't care about you. You don't know what they're really like in real life. You're just seeing the surface level sort of PR kind of version of who they are. You're seeing them with makeup artists and with people who dress them and people who see it that everything that they do is fabulous and everything else.
Right.
So that's definitely the thing, is that because the center is gone, what humanity does is they put all of that symbolism that's really innate within us, in my opinion, to seek out a center, to seek out something transcendental, to seek out something that's connecting, everything basically. And they will put that on other things. So for some person, it's their collection of whatever they collect.
Right.
For someone else, it's something else. For someone else, it could be their job. Their job is everything to them, basically. Right.
Right.
And so, so that's what happens. So when the original center and the polar wisdom, when it's no longer there and it's no longer present, people will put all of these original primordial polar northern centered attributes on everything else.
Well, I mean, this also brings up a point for me that we've been talking about recently, because I've been bringing it up. But the internet and social media. It's when you're talking about the celebrity stuff, when you're talking about it that way, that is what's happening for people on the daily, roster for them. That takes them out of their own life. It takes them out of the present moment. Obviously I'm on social media. I use a phone. We're on the screen right now. So I'm not trying to say all the bad things about it or whatever, but it is something to think about. And when you look at it from this holistic standpoint of it being perhaps a way for us to just be taken away further from our center point, that it's just something worth chewing on, really.
Right.
Because it is then all external. And I've really been starting to dive into just like the dopamine responses that we get from the likes and the hearting of something and seeing if someone responded to you. And then if they don't, you feel bad. And then, or maybe they didn't like it, or you're doing it for this or that or the other thing. And that, the dopamine hits aren't coming from within then anymore. They're coming from an external source. So I imagine back in the day in more traditional primordial times, you were more focused on your immediate surroundings, that being your family, your farm, the forest, the whatever it was, the joy that you got from being with the people you care about, which happens still today. Yeah. And that can happen online too. I'm not saying that it can't, but I think that there's just something going on there with that dynamic. And the more and more we all get wound up in it, the further and further we get from that true center.
I mean, it's interesting too, because it's going to continue to get more extreme.
Yes.
And what I see happening with this, to me, what I'm gathering is that because we live in the times that we live in, very transhuman times, things like that, people for a long time now, I'm not even going to speculate since when or what technology brought it forward or what event or cataclysm or whatever the shift was, but things need to get more extreme to get people's attention.
Yes.
And so music is more extreme. The visuals are more extreme. I think a really good example, honestly, is like pornography too. Mm-hmm. Pornography being very extreme and lifestyles being very extreme, drugs and vices in general being like very extreme. Everything's becoming like next level because it is that dynamic of like these dopamine hits. What once served you early on is no longer going to serve you. So you need twice as much kick. You need twice as much oomph with whatever it is you're consuming or whatever it is you're doing, right?
Yeah.
So now people want to have the screen right there in front of their eyes in the craziest resolution possible, and they're going to use that as an interface. Some people are right now, using these like the goggles as an example, as an interface to the real world. So you're talking to your daughter, but you're wearing goggles. You're going to work, but you're wearing goggles. You're always connected, and so now you need all of these different little screens, within your personal space and everything else, because what people did 20 years ago with technology is not doing it anymore for people.
Right.
So that's the thing definitely with the, to me, I see the world as being very solarized, right? I've already mentioned that. Mm-hmm. But like our education system, our entertainment, the healthcare system. I was
going to say medical system.
Yeah, the medical system, our food. This reminds me a lot of the Baudrillard stuff of simulacra and simulation. Everything is like a simulation of an original thing.
Right.
There's no such thing as an original sort of thing anymore. So you think you're a Christian, you go to church. What people that even that's a good example too. You go to a church and now suddenly there's a fucking like jumbotron, and there's people like being like harnessed from the ceiling, and they're like being like it's all like theatrical, and there's like all of these people, and it's a big sort of like experience now, and you got a huge band and a huge sound system, and it's this audio visual sort of like spectacle now in some places, right?
Right.
It's the same exact thing where it's just like, well, yeah, because church 50 years ago doesn't do it for people anymore.
Right.
That's not going to get people in the door.
Right.
So everything is kind of like that now. Media's like that, content's like that. Even TikTok, the TikTokification of everything.
Right.
I'm on TikTok, so once again, it's kind of the same thing that you're saying. It's like we're just pointing things out.
Yeah, not trying to be hypocritical.
We're not demonizing it to the extreme, saying that you can never use this stuff.
Right.
But it's like the average, like in movies too, the average length of a scene now how fast these cuts are coming.
Oh, that's true.
It's just getting faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, which goes against the still point within,
right.
which goes against this centeredness, which goes against this immutable point, you know? And so that to me is like kind of clear, where it's just like the solarization of everything along with the tech side of things, everything is just like hyper speed, you know?
Oh, go ahead if you weren't finished.
Oh, maybe the last thing I'll say is that the news and information, you know, the amount of information the average person consumes today in 2024 versus 1984 when we were born, you know, is absolutely like next level crazy bonkers.
Oh yeah.
The amount of everything, the amount of stimulation and all of that kind of stuff, the access to information and everything. Once again, yeah, we do our thing on here. We're streaming right now,
and we benefit from it too. You know, it's like
totally.
There's benefit to it. There's good positive things that come from it. When it's used as a tool, when it's used with like, you know, thoughtfulness. I think
it can consume
too.
Everything though, right?
It really can. And I think, you know, one of the things that's coming to my mind as we're talking about this is a false light. And so you're talking about how, well, the original light is probably polar. Well, then it was moved to the solar. So, but then we're also being given all this artificial light that we're guided to, we're drawn to, like moths to a flame, which is a screen, or it can be whatever, you know, whatever your thing is. I think that's something too to think about, because then it's almost just like it's something. The false light aspect of it is something to think about.
And it's literally it's blue light.
Yeah.
You know, so it is an artificial light. And the way it's set up too, the way it is now is you literally, to me, this is a very solarized thing. You have to pump energy, or you have to get energy from a central source.
Right.
So in my understanding, I think that polar geocentric wisdom, I guess, or that perspective unlocks so much stuff about our ancient past. In that people, you know, there's a lot of people online and they look at old technology, old buildings and this and that and whatever. So much of it looks polar to me. And so much of it is, you know, people have said it's like they're drawing energy from the ether and they're like tapping into, you know, that side of things. And they're generating energy where that building is, you know, and there's potentially amazing, incredible things that people have done with that energy, right? So in the kind of polar northern geocentric way of doing things, it was about generating energy and being primarily concerned with what's happening literally where you're at, and not where everyone else is at, and not what other people are doing, you know, around the world or whatever. And so on the other side of Earth. And so I see that with how we actually get our water and how we actually get our electricity.
Right.
It's illegal to collect rainwater in certain places.
Right.
Right. You have to set yourself up in certain places, and your house has to be connected to the grid.
Right.
You know, and so everything, again, it's like it's bringing things outside and bringing it in.
Right.
You know, you even think about just how things go these days. And again, we're using, you know, technology and all of that, but just everything being kind of like shipped in from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Right. So from all over the world, basically. This wasn't as much of a concern, I don't think, a long time ago.
No.
You know, it wasn't possible. Maybe it was possible. I don't know. But I feel like people had more of a true local sort of understanding of things, so that your sacred center that connected you to the cosmos, not only is it within, but as you tap into the within, you realize that it's actually in your, it's like in your backyard,
right?
Basically, that you don't need to go anywhere else to kind of commune or connect with God, or, you know, whatever you want to say. So I see that all over the place, where people have to bring things in from the outside, but no one, or very few people, are choosing to generate something from the inside and bring it forward, sort of thing. That's more of a lost sort of thing these days, I would say. Depending on how you look at it, right?
Yeah, it is. Because there's plenty of people doing lots of internal work, lots of inspired work, and bringing it out into the world, there, and you could flip it and say, well, there's enough people doing that to fill something like social media with all this information. So there's enough inspired thought and inspired projects to be thrown up on a screen so someone can go out and grab that and go, oh, wow, look at that, or whatever.
Yeah.
So, it's balanced. It's balanced, and there's beauty in that. I just think that, there's ways to go about it there's just healthier ways to go about it than what's going on.
Another word that comes to mind is always, the fact that this earlier tradition was more holistic. And I see that the solarized paradigm that we live in is not holistic.
Oh no.
And in a way, symbolically, what's kind of been said is that it's almost like the rays of the sun, where the rays of the sun, the further out they are, the further away they are from each other, and it's all externalized. And so I think there's kind of a metaphor there that you can kind of chew on or play with that kind of symbolically represents the fact that everything is like split apart. It's also I kind of see that a lot of our like modern science is very much solarized too, in a way, that everything is compartmentalized. Everything is kind of separate from each other. Nothing's holistic. The classic thing people say that, you go to a school, a university, none of the departments, like they're not as integrated as you think they probably should be.
Yeah.
So these people over here are learning this, these people here are learning that, these people over there are learning that. So you have like hyper specialists. You're developing people who know a lot about one tiny little thing, and that's it. And then so they don't know, just like a lot of doctors and stuff. Ancient, more like medicine women, kind of shamanistic type people, medicine people back in the day. They had more of a holistic sort of approach. So they would address your spirit, they would address your emotions, or what we might call psychology today,
right?
Something along those lines. And it's like, you're not going to get that these days. It's going to be, oh, here's a pill, here's an external solution for an internal problem,
right? Yeah, especially if you're going allopathy,
right?
Definitely not going to be getting
right. Totally.
Yeah.
So you said something about it kind of being beautiful too, and I just want to say, I'm like, I feel privileged to be living right now and kind of witnessing all of this.
Yeah, it's crazy.
As it is, and I feel privileged to be able to unlearn what I'm unlearning. And I'm super grateful that I've come across this information, because as you can see, it's no longer for me just a hobby or whatever.
Right.
There's a real spiritual potency here.
Yes.
That's pretty obvious to me now. And I feel like it's what I was looking for this whole entire time, and I feel like so many things kind of lined up for me to come and understand some of this stuff, and I feel like I still have a long way to go with all of it, but I'm happy to scratch the surface for some people and maybe just introduce some of these concepts to people or whatever. So I'm not bitter at the way things are. I'm not bitter at technology. I'm not bitter at the sun. I'm none of those things. To me, I think of all of this as basically a gift. It's a gift, and any lies that I've been told or any trauma that I've experienced from living here, these are gifts in disguise, basically. So now I have, because of this information that I've really gotten into, I feel like my appreciation for it is that much greater, having lived in the complete opposite world for decades.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And
Yeah.
that's a good thing to remember too. And I think, you've brought so much of this to my table to chew on and understand and integrate into my world. And it has me questioning everything so much more deeply than I have before. And we've been questioning a lot of stuff for a really long time in terms of like alternative information or what is really going on kind of stuff. And now, most recently, I'll say definitely, like even within the last like few months, I have just been in this place of just reevaluating everything. This is making me reevaluate so many things. And it's really similar to how I felt during 2020 when all of that kind of stuff happened, where it was like, okay, if this is what's happening right now, Like you really have to internalize this and apply this stuff to your life and question things further. And I kind of feel a similar feeling to that time and to right now.
Yeah.
While integrating this information more deeply and understanding it more and understanding what's really important and why this is very important. So I'm grateful for that and grateful for all the stuff that you keep learning and bringing to the table.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's nice to have a partner in crime with all this stuff.
Yes.
Obviously.
I agree.
And I'll say an interesting sort of side note is that I first started looking into the geocentric side of things, questioning cosmology, cosmography, all that kind of stuff. First being introduced to even, I think, the North Star and why that even matters and why maybe it should be given not even so much more credit, but why it should just be understood more if you are interested already in kind of what's happening in the heavens, It's the center of the wheel of heaven. And so I'm pretty sure 10 years ago is when I first started looking into all of this stuff.
Yeah, wow,
so
that makes sense.
Yeah, so my journey with this information, I'll say that like one of the really sort of like concrete, potent like steps or introductory sort of phases I went through happened 10 years ago with this.
Wow.
And so in my opinion, I hope this doesn't sound arrogant or anything, but I really feel like there's a lot of people who are interested in geocentrism or what some people might refer to as flat earth. I hate that term personally for so many different reasons. It comes with so much baggage. I don't think it's a complete picture either. I don't think it's holistic.
Right.
Just that term. And so I tend to not use it, but I think that this awareness and other people are catching on, and other people are on board, and some people are already running with it. So I'm not saying that I'm the only person, doing this or whatever. But to me, this is the evolution of that material.
Yeah.
It is really kind of integrating it with the metaphysical thing and with the centeredness thing and all this other kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I tend to perceive it.
Yeah, no, I love that because too, with the flat earth thing too, I think there's cul-de-sacs within even the term itself.
Oh yeah.
Because you find that they just continuously, who's they? I don't know. But a lot of the information that surrounds flat earth just focuses on the same kind of stuff all the time. Yes, it's flat. Yeah, that horizon's flat. Yep, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever, that's great. That was one of the things that woke me up to it. But I feel like the geocentric polar stuff takes it that step further, just like which has kind of been the theme of this whole conversation of it's that next layer down. It's that next layer deeper that I think is what the geocentric model, and when you start thinking of it in that way, brings that holistic element to it instead of being so compartmentalized that it has to be this proof, that proof, the other proof, the proof, that proof, and then you have so many proofs going on that I think for a lot of people it may even become overwhelming.
Yeah.
That okay, I'm looking at this. Yes, that makes sense. Oh my gosh, okay, but when you kind of bring it back to this polar centric sort of geocentric model, it kind of just begins to make a little more sense, and it almost not humanizes it, but it makes it
no, it does.
It just allows it to be a little more digestible, and then you have all of this other history that you're learning to back it up, and all these amazing researchers and even religions and cultures that have been looking at things like this for however long. And then it's like, well, yeah, that probably is what's going on. You know what I mean? And so
I'll say that this is one of the things for me that is, I guess, important. But the idea that the people, if things were geocentric, people were more geocentric, what did their culture look like? What did they revere? How did they see things? Like, what did their temples look like? What did their rituals look like? What were they encoding, in their sort of spiritual framework? And to me, it's more polar. And so that's the thing, is that you're saying it humanizes things more. You're exactly right. So to me, that's what I feel like I've kind of gotten into, is a little bit of the mindset of people who were more geocentric, with these ancient cosmologies and everything else.
Right.
And obviously I'm tracking the flip. That's a major thing for me, is tracking this flip from polar to solar. There is a major shift, as we've been talking about, this major sort of thing that happened. And so to me, that's of primary sort of interest, I suppose. The other thing I'll say, just because I mentioned it, and I mentioned this on Saturday on Spiders, and I don't think I mentioned it on Friday, but here I go. But I think one of the big things about it is um, that to me is important. This idea of orientation. And so that the center orients, the center allows you to have a sort of idea of where you're at with things. And so that's what the north does. That's what the compass does, right? The compass shows you where is north. That's its primary function, is to show you where north is. And so I've said this a billion times, but ancient seafarers and stuff like that, the North Star was the preeminent star. They had to know where north was in order to understand where they were going if they didn't have instrumentation or whatever. And if you were looking at a different constellation in the heavens, you had to know that constellation's relationship with the north. So it wasn't just good enough to be like, okay, cool, there's Sirius. All right, well, where's Sirius in relationship to the North Star? That's what you had to know. You had to know, okay, cool, that's Taurus. Well, where's Taurus's relationship with the North Star? You have to know where you're at, where the sky clock is at in the heavens, and that central point would be the pole star, right? So this idea of orientation hinges on the world axis. It hinges on the North Star, in my opinion, being the center. And so one of the things I broke down on Friday is that the word orient is a mystical term as well. And that on one level, the Orient refers to the East, but some authors and mystics and magicians and wizard type people, sages, blah, 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 that when they referred to the Orient, they were actually referring to the North. They were actually referring to the cosmic North, beyond the North even. And that the mystical Orient isn't East, it's North. And even the same way with the sun that rises in the East. It's not the actual sun. It's a different thing. They're talking about sort of a cosmic sun, if you will, or a black sun or a midnight sun, which would be the stationary sun. It would be the immutable sun at the center. So a symbolic sun, but just basically a reference to the same center that we've been referring to. So you can refer to the center as a sun if you want to, but it's not the literal sun. It's not the sun that, goes around every single day, in my opinion, right?
Right.
But people have gotten that confused over time. And so orientation has a lot to do with the north. That's my understanding. I've referenced this book a few times already, but The Man of Light in Iranian Sufism by Henry Corbin, he talks about this beautifully, about orientation and how it relates to the north. It's really, really awesome stuff. But one of the things that I've picked up, though, is that one of the things that the world axis brings as well is it brings a dynamic of a definitive up. Okay, so that there is, to geocentric people, to polar primordial people, there was no debate, from what I'm gathering with my research, there was no debate on what up is. Up meant up, and there was a universal up. This sounds really basic, but it is more wool that has been pulled over our eyes, in my opinion. Because if you believe we live in a spherical Earth, and that it's a ball that's literally floating in space and all this other nonsense, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
That means that there are people that their up would be our down.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
So if they're in Australia, their up is down.
Right.
Complete opposite of where we're at. And if they're somewhere along the equator or whatever, their up is to the side or whatever from where we're at. This is complete nonsense. Because what this really does is this doesn't give you it lacks stability. It lacks, something that's actually definitive, and it lacks a structure, basically. And so the heliocentric globe model throws so many things out of whack. It's absolutely nuts. But this is another one of these things that I'm really appreciating right now, is this idea of up and down, because symbolism has a lot to do with up or down. So the mountain is a mountain because you can scale it because it goes upward. The ram is a ram because it can climb mountains and go upward.
Right.
So the world axis is a bridge between realms. So heaven would be symbolically, or the heavens would be upward. If you're talking about a spherical ball, it throws all of that out of whack. And so there's actually like a really potent sort of thread that you can pull at here about the dynamic of what is definitive up and what is definitive down, and how that plays a role when it comes to like ascension mythology and all of this other type of stuff. And so with the globe earth, all of that is completely thrown out the window.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when you brought this up a few days ago, we kind of, I thought about chaos magic, the symbol for chaos magic. It reminds me of that. But then also what it came to mind just now is literally the model that they show for a virus or whatever. It's that. It's the spikes all over the ball.
Right.
And it's like, that's nonsense.
Right.
So it's kind of, there's might be some sort of theme there,
right?
Nonsense theme, whatever you want to say going on. And I'm not saying chaos is nonsense, so I'm not trying to lump that in, because I think that chaos is necessary here in some sort of way, whatever. But just that model, that vision of what you're talking about, to me, that's what I thought of is
right.
The whole
right,
whatever.
Well, the thing is, just saying with chaos, on one level, it's a polar symbol. It's another polar symbol, as all symbols tend to break down to. But what is it really showing you? It's taking you away from self. Yeah.
It's outward everything.
So
even
it's
looking, that symbol.
Yeah. So there is an axial sort of point there. There's that middle dot, and then all of the 8 arrows, are kind of radiant from there, expressed from there. But on one level, it's like removing you from self. It's not encouraging you to go within. It's encouraging you to go without, I would say.
Yeah.
Is one of the kind of inversions with it a little bit. And then, the viral thing. Yeah, that's a whole can of worms. But that's very much related to the solarized world idea.
It really is.
So it's like that kind of, that kind of hoax or whatever. It's only possible in a world that we live in today.
Right.
But that's a whole can of worms too.
It is. But I just thought about it. So
yeah, no, totally. But there's a lot to say about it. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right on.
Nice.
Yes. So how do you feel, babe? Do you feel like
I feel pretty good?
You got most of your extra points out?
I do.
Because I feel like this was a really good one.
Nice.
And we're coming up on, we got an hour 40. So
yeah, I think we're solid.
Yeah, just want to check in and see how you're feeling. And
yeah, we can wrap it up.
All right. So do you have any closing thoughts that you want people to kind of ponder? If, there's a lot to kind of absorb with this one. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say that the thing for me that always is the thing is that I just want to encourage people to go within, tap into their center, know thyself, you'll know the universe. It truly is the bridge to other planes of realities, other planes of existence. That's a whole entire metaphysical thing that relates to the center. And that the center is everywhere. That's kind of the other thing too. That's kind of bizarre and interesting to think about, is that everything occupies a center, and everything, since it's emanated from a center, it mirrors that center as well. And I don't like quantum physics or quantum science. I think there's a lot of hoaxy stuff with all of that. So that's not my thing. But there is definitely an etheric spiritual connection between all centers, I'll say.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, that's pretty much it, though.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And I encourage people who maybe missed it to check out Mario's presentation from Friday.
Yep.
On his YouTube channel, the Esoteric Solar Symbolism.
Close enough.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, the rising sun. Yeah.
Yeah. So I encourage you guys to check out that, because if you missed it, it'll kind of maybe fill in some gaps that we talked about tonight. But yeah, I mean, this was wonderful. So
awesome. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, you got it.
It was really awesome.
So now we got some credits to roll through.
Yep, we got credits as usual. So for those who want to maybe...
And we are coming in hot.
Yeah, the lighting around here, But I leaned in, that's why. So we will add these credits to the screen. Yeah. All right. So michelleshealinghome.com for all things healing home. As I said in the beginning of the show, you can find my store, my blog, my offerings, more information about me and the podcast, all there at michelleshealinghome.com. And as always, thank you to all the patrons out there. You guys, your support is very, very, very much appreciated from all of you. So thank you to Chance, Sarah G, Liam, Miri, and Hank, Jenny G, Erica, Moonlander, Mary, Louie, Logan, Mickey, Doreen, Debbie, Natasha, Mary Beth, Nausicaa, Stephanie, Charlai, Peter, Elise and James, Rachel, Trisha, and Vanessa. Thank you all so very much. Patreon.com/thehealinghome for anyone who would want to come and join us over there. and a handbook for herbal and natural cat care. For all you who follow me, probably have already heard me talk about this, but I'm very, very excited to be offering up this ebook to all of you. It's a great introductory guide for people who want to start incorporating herbs and natural remedies into their cats' lives. And I have a very deep well of cat love that has been poured into this ebook, and I'm now going to be adding to it. So there'll soon be a revised version that will come out with even more tips, some more personal stories, and all that good stuff. So you can find that on my website as well. Full Moon Offering newsletter letter number 42 is now out. It just came out on Saturday, and I have soap, shampoo, and tinctures for everybody for this go around. And, you know, I'm really excited about this offering because two of the things that I added to my store inventory are soap storage and usage tools, which like this soap bag here, which is wonderful because you can use it for travel. You can put a bar of soap into it and it dries the soap out in between uses, which is crucial. So anyone who knows anything about bar soap, specifically handmade bar soap, it will melt very easily if it's not dried in between uses. So I now have these wonderful tools, nice pine soap dish, and this cotton fabric soap bag, which is also can be used for exfoliation and all those sorts of things. You can hang it in the shower. You can keep it in your drawer. It's really wonderful. So this offering I'm very pumped about. I also have the blue vervain tincture that is made with blue vervain that I grew in our garden, and reishi double extract tincture, which is made with reishi mushrooms that we harvested on the Oregon coast. Very powerful, very potent. All of that medicine is available online on my website. And for anyone watching, you can see the menu currently, what I have. I also have elderberry and reishi syrup that I just made, fresh batch. That one's going fast too. So you can just check all that out if you're interested. The next Full Moon Offering newsletter is going to be coming out on March 25th. So you can look for that. And if you haven't already, feel free and sign up for the newsletter also on my website.
Yes, I really just want to say that people should really do that because that's when you get the first notice of when you drop new products and everything else. And just the way things have been going, that those people are going to get first dibs on stuff, and that you've even like launched a newsletter and then you've like sold out of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, within like the next day or whatever. So if you're just following kind of the podcast and you're just doing that, that's obviously awesome. But if you're really interested in the products, getting the newsletter is like the quickest way you'll be updated with your new offerings and stuff. And because you do small batch stuff, it's not that difficult for you to sell out of stuff.
Yeah,
you know, because it's just literally you creating everything, you know, and it's all just like, you know, it's more boutique-y that way. So I don't know. I just feel like the newsletter really, if you want to keep tabs on what's going on, you should do that.
Yeah, thank you, babe. It's true. And I only send out one newsletter a month, so you're not going to be getting a bunch of stuff in your inbox. And I will encourage people to check their spam folders if you are signed up and you haven't been getting it, because I have seen people, like multiple people signing up like multiple times. So I'm always wondering, I wonder if they're not getting it. So it might be going to your spam. So just know that I have noticed that a couple times that, duplicate names come through, and so just check that. But it is the best way to know what's happening and what I have going on and what's coming down the pipeline. All right, so next week we will be joined by Topher Gardner of the Biocharisma podcast. Very excited for this one. And I really enjoyed talking with Topher on his show a couple weeks ago. And right away, I was just like, I want to talk to him more. And so I invited him onto the Healing Home. This one is actually going to be a pre-recorded episode. So it will premiere on the 5th of March at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Yeah, and Topher is seriously, he is really sharp. And I just appreciate his wisdom and what he brings to the table and what he knows and all of that kind of stuff. So people who aren't familiar with him, he comes highly recommended, I would say.
Yeah, totally. And I'm really excited to just ask him more questions, because even when I was on his show, I felt like I have so many questions for him. And
Yeah.
so that's why I knew I really wanted to bring him in, because I have a lot of things that I want to pick his brain about, and particularly his dome homes, his journey of getting there, and
Totally.
stuff like that. So come on and join us on the 5th of March to find out where our conversation goes. And Mr. Mario with the Rising Sun.
Yes, so that is my thumbnail for the presentation I gave on Friday. Give it a go. Check it out. I think I did a pretty good job. I've gotten some really good feedback from it and everything else. So I think it's one of my better ones, I would say. I kind of like the fact, too, that it's, in a way, it's astrological, but in a way, it's kind of not. So I kind of like that, too, that it's not necessarily related to a sign, but it's talking about the whole system. You know, that's kind of just really quick. One of the things that I wanted to perhaps bring up is that me studying astrology and putting content out about astrology, I found that there were certain symbols that didn't really seem appropriate to like talk about because I was following the signs, you know. And I feel like with astrology, you're kind of taught that the 12 sign system is like this complete end all be all system, and nothing outside of it kind of exists, or something like that. That might be kind of like taking it too far, but that's kind of the sense that I even get from a lot of astrologers, is like, oh no, this is the wisdom of the ages. Everything that's encoded in here is everything you need to know about symbolism and this and that. And so at a certain point, I kind of realized that, you know what, there's actually like other animals that I want to talk about. There's other symbols that I want to talk about that aren't necessarily astrological, or if they are, it's very, very veiled, you know. So that's kind of one of the things that I've kind of come to the conclusion of too, over the last couple of years, is just that there's more to learn symbolically than just astrology.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm glad that you're saying this and you've gotten to this point, and I knew you would, because you have so much knowledge when it comes to just symbolism in general. But yeah, with this presentation, I felt I told you this, but I feel like it was one of, if not your best presentations that you've done online in this sphere. But also me seeing, I feel like you're really coming into your own with this information in that sense of now like branching out a little bit more and like starting to really explore some more of the topics that you have a lot of knowledge on. So I think it's really good. So it was a good one for sure.
Right on. Thank you.
Yes.
Right. And then I'm happy to announce, I mentioned it on Friday, but I'm doing a Patreon exclusive series starting in March called Symbolic Secrets.
Woo!
And what I'm going to be doing here is I'm starting off with the Major Arcana. And I'm going to be going through literally every single card of the Major Arcana, one by one session at a time. So one session on the Fool, one session on the Magician, etc. So this series will go for at least 22 weeks, and then we'll see what I do from there. You know, does it make sense just to cover the whole deck? You know, what will I do from there? I don't know, but I want to continue this Symbolic Secrets series for Patreon. You know, so the idea is that I will go live for patrons, and I feel like my patrons definitely deserve it, and that's where it's going to be hosted. And I'm probably going to release a few episodes, you know, on my YouTube, so people know kind of what the deal is with all of that. But I'm excited to do this because very recently I did a whole 22-week series with a student, and we went through the Major Arcana together. And so he was very interested in the tarot. He wanted to learn what I knew and all of that about these cards. And so I gave him a very kind of unfiltered sort of like approach to the tarot of like what I really think about some of these cards. And I'll say, a lot of the stuff I mentioned about these cards, I've never talked about anywhere, you know? And so I have a lot of information about every single card that I have not discussed publicly.
Yeah.
And so he got like a deep dive that I haven't given anybody really, you know? So this is kind of my opportunity to kind of do that for my patrons essentially. And he got a lot out of it. And so now we just committed to doing the whole entire tarot. You know, we're going to fast track it a little bit. We're not spending one session per card, but he liked this 22-week series so much that we ended up just committing to doing the whole entire deck.
Yeah.
And so so that's what you're going to get. You're going to get that, and it's going to be interesting. And I'm going to filter it through, obviously, my polar perspective with things, you know, because I'm seeing that a lot of the tarot has a polar correspondence to it, you know, so that's something that I haven't really talked about either yet. But if you sign up for my Patreon, you'll get all of those insights.
Yes. And I got to say, unfiltered Mario is pretty damn fun.
You like it?
Yeah. So I think people are
within reason.
Yeah. You know what I mean? But when it comes to this stuff, you know, because I get the unfiltered versions and it's pretty rad. And so it's a really cool offering that you're doing for patrons. I think it's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then for everything else, symbolicstudies.com.
Yes. Alrighty, folks. Well, I think that's going to do it for this evening.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you guys got something out of it. Thanks to everybody in the chat for hanging out. We appreciate you as always. And until next time, take care out there, and we'll see you next week.
Have a good one.
Later.